is sponsored by Sarah and John Kissinger of the Sterling Society. The Sterling Society is an auxiliary organization for the Fine Arts Center, and we support all things that the Fine Arts Center does, and they're dedicated. And so now we have Aneka Ingold. Aneka is an award-winning painter known for originally layered figure compositions that explore themes of femininity, resilience, and transformation. If you haven't looked at her website, I encourage you to do so. It's pretty deep, and there's all her awards on it. It's very impressive. Drawing inspiration from mythology, history, and personal narrative, her work speaks to the complexities of identity and power of the feminine spirit. Two things. One, she would like to have questions at the end of her presentation, and there's the reception down the hall with the work that she's exhibiting now. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Aneka Ingold. Thank you so much for coming out today to listen to me talk about my artwork. I want to thank Catherine Bergman for this opportunity. So grateful for that connection. She's been an absolute joy to work with, and so appreciative of everything she's done to make this happen. The show is called Metamorphosis, and it covers the last 8 years of work that I've been kind of honing my skills with. And it's a collection of pieces that are inspired by both personal experiences I've had as a woman, but also the goal is to try and tap into a more universal female experience as well. And these pieces address many of the changes that I've gone through over the last decade. And so I want to go into more detail about the work in the show here at the Art Center. But first, I wanted to give you a little more of a history of how I got to this place in my artistic development. So I'm going to go all the way back to high school. My passion for making art started when I was a kid. I was always drawing, and I started making a lot more drawings when I was in high school. I was really interested in fashion, and so my grandma, who was very, very into fashion, she always had fashion magazines, like Bazaar and Vogue and British Vogue, and she would collect them or keep them for me, and she would give them to me when I would see her, and so I would just copy pictures from these magazines. And I would just use graphite pencil on paper. So here's a couple of the sketches. All right, and after high school, I don't go to the next slide quite yet. After high school, I went to Grand Valley State University, which is in Michigan, which is where I'm from. And that's where I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And I got what was called the Alexander Calder Scholarship by submitting a portfolio of drawings like these. At GVSU, I learned how to draw from life, which I hadn't done before. I got to take the nude figure drawing classes and work from direct observation. And that was a very different experience than taking an image that's already two-dimensional and just copying it. You have to take something that's three-dimensional and transfer that information into 2 dimensions. And I was really excited to do that and use the different mediums too, like charcoal and Conte, not just pencil. And I loved drawing from the model. It made me feel like very self-reflective, examining my feelings that I had about my own body as a woman. And it felt sort of like looking into a mirror in a way. So I also did self-portraits. I started drawing myself in the mirror a lot, and which I still do a lot today. But I was examining different body parts, how I felt about my own body, what I could do with my own body, how I could use it as a vessel for storytelling. And so these are some studies I did with my hands. And this idea of holding an object led me to the idea of symbolism and a desire to make work that was a little more allegorical. Even if the story is simple, it still starts to have meaning to it. And so after I did all my foundations classes in college, I had to choose an emphasis area, and I was in love with drawing, but drawing wasn't an option to have as a focus in school, so I chose painting, which I had never done before. So this is a double self-portrait that I did as an undergrad when I started my painting classes, and we had the new model, but when it came time for me to make work on my own, I still wanted to work with a figure. So I use myself as a model quite often. So these are done in front of a mirror. And painting was a new challenge for me because we're adding elements of color and texture, and color came very naturally to me. I knew somewhat about color theory, but I just have a really instinctual sense of color, and I was really excited that this could also add meaning to my stories. I like the idea of the double self-portrait because it's almost like I'm having a conversation with myself. I wanted to see what it would feel like to have the figure clothed or partially clothed versus nude, seated versus standing, and using some objects as symbols like the hanger and the shirt being on or off or in a hand or on the floor. Started to provoke feelings of maybe some tension, some feelings of vulnerability, and asking myself a little bit more about my own identity. And at this time, I was looking at a lot of surrealist painters. That's something I've always been interested in, is surrealism. And this artist, Dorothea Tanning, was one of my favorites. She still is. And I just loved this self-portrait that she did called The Birthday. And so I used some of her ideas in the painting she did here to kind of mimic some of the things that she did. I responded to her use of space and of light and of color, but I also was really interested in her confrontation, the way she's looking back at the viewer and what that made me feel like. It made me feel really engaged with the piece in a different way than I think I had seen in a while. And so I felt like very much it was challenging the male gaze, and I wanted to experiment with that more in my work. So, oh, here it is. I lost my notes for a second. So as I made more paintings of the female figure, I was exploring this idea of the societal pressure on women to have a conventional beauty, and especially as it pertains to the body. And I just saw a lot of the objectification of women happening in the media all the time around me. And I thought, well, women are often seen as parts and not as a whole person. And so this painting explores that idea of the commodification of females' bodies, where we see just a face or an arm or a body part and not a whole person. And then I had my Bachelor of Fine Arts show, and I went in a totally different direction. I took a series, I've been taking photographs of myself a lot to paint from, and I did this series of photographs of my own body in these sort of compromised positions, and I was cropping into the body, making it more ambiguous. So you can tell it's a body, but it almost becomes something else. And these were really large paintings, like 5 foot by 6 foot, which was much larger than I had been working. And I thought they were kind of confrontational and voyeuristic, but they were also kind of like visceral and foreign, almost like a landscape. It almost became topographic. And I really liked playing with that perception, capturing this really intimate moment that was riding a line between pain and pleasure, and showing the body in both its fragility and in its power as a female. And at that time, I was really interested in the work of Jenny Saville. I was inspired by these are self-portraits that she did as well. She was recognized, if you're not familiar with her, she was recognized in the 1990s as one of the young British artists, and she was part of the Saatchi collection, and she became really famous at that time. But this is her naked body, which is very defiant and overpowering. Again, she's confronting that male gaze. And I was trying to capture some of this in my own work. So this is me, my final year at Grand Valley. And my final year, I received another scholarship, the Advanced Visual Arts Scholarship. And this is me in my studio, and you get a sense of scale of the pieces, and you can get a sense of how cool my jeans are. And after I graduated, I worked at a local art gallery for a few years, and I continued to paint. I continued to make paintings of body parts, and I was starting to play with some brighter colors. And symbolism again, and so here's some of the work that I did in between my undergrad and graduate studies. And during this time I got married and I had a baby, and this is a painting of my son when he was about 2 years old, I think. And when he was about 2, I was ready to go back to school. I wanted to get back in the studio more, and he was old enough that I felt like I could do that. And I had this urge to challenge myself and change my work. I was really missing drawing. There was something about drawing that I always felt so connected to, and I just hadn't done it in a long time. And all of these paintings I've shown you so far, oil paintings, and I got really good at oil painting, but I still felt like something was missing, you know? So I applied to Kendall College of Art and Design, which is also in Michigan, and I got my master's in drawing, and it was an option at Kendall to have an emphasis in drawing, and I was really excited to use some tools that I had been missing. And I found a whole new way to work. I wanted to keep painting. I didn't want to leave that behind completely, but I wanted to draw too. And my mentor, Deb Rockman, she was very open to my mixed media approach. And this way that I started working is how I still work to this day. And so this is me in my studio at Kendall. And I just want to tell you a little bit about my process, and you can kind of see the drawing in progress here, or painting, or mixed media piece, whatever you want to call it. I never know how to identify the work, but anyway, the process starts with a collection of images. I'm taking things out of fashion magazines, National Geographic, or books that I found. I cut up a lot of my books. I used to get in trouble for that, but I'm not married anymore, so I can do whatever I want. I sometimes forget though, and I'm looking through a book and I'm like, oh, there are a lot of pages missing out of this one. But the images, I collect the images, and I do it very instinctually. I don't plan what the work is going to be about. I just know certain feelings I have about images, and then I want them to go together. I let them kind of speak to each other. I just kind of have a stack. I don't actually make a collage, but I pin them up to the wall, and I kind of see what they're going to do with each other. And then the narrative just starts to form. And it is kind of like, I feel like there's this sort of archetypal knowledge from the past, almost my psyche telling me what to do. It's not something I have to be conscious of. And so I put I use a 90-pound Stonehenge paper, and then I gesso it, I prime it, paper that takes wet media really well. So I can prime it, and then I switch from oil painting to acrylic paint, so that I can mix the materials, the drawing materials, and the water-based paint. So I will put a layer of paint down, as you can see here, the portrait of the woman. It has, the base color is sort of a blue-gray, and then I use a Prismacolor pencil to render on top of that. And I also will use, sometimes I use the paint pens too, water-based paint pens to do patterns and other details. So I plan as I go. This is me working on that same piece in my studio. You can kind of get a sense of scale. And I tend to work really large scales, about a 4 foot by 6 foot piece. And I was very interested in reading about Carl Jung's thoughts and theories about symbolism. And so I was getting a lot of ideas from reading that as well. And I really don't understand what the piece is about until I'm almost done with it. And I sometimes don't even know until I've let it sit for a few months and I come back to it. I'm always learning new things about the work. I like the challenge of trying to interpret the work objectively later on, and discovering things about myself that I realize that these are reflections of things that have happened to me or women that I know, and they just kind of trickle into the piece. So here's the finished piece. This one's called Blind Contemplation, and like I said, I did this in grad school. And I wanted to go into some of the meaning behind it that I realized later after the piece was done. But I'm always sort of, even if it's not a self-portrait, I'm living vicariously through the woman that I am giving a story to. And it's always in a domestic space or a landscape, one or the other. There are always animals and animate objects and patterns. And in this one, this domestic space is definitely about the pressures that women feel to be in the home and be caretakers. Her braided hair, the woman's braided hair, it falls to the floor and it wraps around this wild animal that is kind of in a caring and loving way, but then the hair turns into a braided rug on the floor that's going to be walked on. And I think when I use animals, they often stand in for relationships I have with other people, or even a side of myself that might be animalistic. But this one, I think very much ends up being like a child that's being cared for. And again, this is about sort of the life of a caretaker for a woman. And I was, again, looking at a lot of surrealist artists, and I started to really fall in love with the work of Frida Kahlo, who even at that time, I don't think a lot of people knew who she was, but I think everyone knows who she is now. And I think she's way more famous now than her husband, Diego Rivera, was. So, anyway, this piece I made is called I Love You to Death. I put side by side with Frida Kahlo's piece, The Love Embrace of the Universe, to show some parallels and how her work was inspiring me. And in this piece, and I loved that Frida's work was very much about being a woman and the roles that women play, and that was really something I connected to. And she was exploring the maternal role here, and her this woman who has this large woman who has these arms wrapped around her, I think is a reference to her wet nurse when she was a child. And the wet nurse is holding her, but then she's holding her husband almost like an infant. And then in my piece here, this was actually a piece I made about my mother. And this isn't my mother, but it's the stand-in for her that I wanted to use. And she was telling me this story about how when she was a child, she got to take home a baby chick from school. And she loved it so much that she actually ended up killing it because she just kept holding it too tightly. And I was just thinking about how even when we're young, even when we're girls, we're always thought, we're expected to be caretakers and be kind of coddling everyone. And I thought, now that I'm a mother, I could see so many of the things that made sense to me that my own mother did. And so it was just kind of me processing all of that. All right, this piece is called Recognize the Waiting. And I was also looking at surrealist artist Lenora Carrington. And this is a self-portrait she did. And she had a lot of like unexpected objects and characters happening in her pieces, like a wild animal in a domestic space, or purposefully skewed vantage point of a room, and using a door or a window to make the space even deeper, to pull you back into the environment and keep you interested and engaged. And I just really wanted to use all of those devices in my own pieces to make the work more engaging and interesting. I have to take a quick drink. I'm still a little nervous. So I thought if I really want to make work about women, I need to study more lives of women, a whole range of women. And I hope that those stories can continue to trickle into my narratives, because it's really important to me to tell my own personal stories, but I also think it's really important as a woman to understand my identity through other women's stories as well. So these are several of both the artists, writers. They were feminists, midwives, psychoanalysts, mothers. All of these women had faced hardships, and it inspired me to kind of look at this range of status and character that they had and how they had survived. They were all survivors, and that was important to me. And I definitely feel like a survivor myself in many ways. And this is my MFA show. You can get a sense of scale. These pieces, none of them got framed. I just hung them on the wall with pins. And you can see the second one, and that was the biggest piece I made, and that was a 6 foot by 8 foot painting. And I actually painted it on vinyl flooring. I couldn't find paper big enough. I just went to a Home Depot and I got a roll of vinyl and I painted on that. And it's not archival, but and I do get in trouble for that sometimes. But I just was experimenting. I was in school and it was fun. All right, so then after I graduated, my husband at the time got a job at University of Tampa here in Florida. And so we moved to Tampa, and this piece is the first one I made post-MFA called Aberration, and this one is part of the permanent collection at the Muskegon Museum of Art up north in Michigan now. I continued to work with the same method after I graduated, the process that I explained to you with the mixed media. And this piece, and also this piece before it went to the permanent collection at Muskegon Museum of Art, this piece won first place at the Valdosta State University All Media Jury Show. And in this piece, I was exploring the idea of the maid, mother, crone archetype, which states that the woman's life consists of 3 phases in terms of her physical reproduction. It's before, during, and after the body's ability to have a child. And I was trying to provoke a questioning of what I thought was a very limited definition of a woman. A woman's worth should not be dependent on, nor should it be, a woman's worth is not dependent on, nor should it be dependent on on what she does with her womb. But that said, I had another baby. So anyway, this is my son and my daughter. And a woman's identity changes when she becomes a mother. And I knew it had already because I had my son, but it continued to change and evolve after having a second child. And there's a sort of symbiotic connection or relationship you have with the child. And I wanted to delve deeper into this experience. So I made this piece about my relationship with my daughter when she was born. And it's called Postpartum because I had postpartum depression for almost a year after she was born. And I don't think enough people talk about that issue, and I don't think our society even wants to really acknowledge it, because we're supposed to be so happy when the baby is born, and we're supposed to still be the perfect mother, and I was not feeling very capable at the time. And so this is a very unapologetic look at how much we expect mothers to do. However, it's also, for me, as a survivor of it, it was also about the strength that I had to find to move forward, and also the powerful love and devotion that I had to my children. It wasn't about the love I had, it was just something that I couldn't control, and I had a lot of emotions about this. So I wanted to share some of the symbolism of this piece that I kind of came to the conclusion of after the fact. But this is a self-portrait. Again, this is the blue skin was sort of felt like a death of identity in a way, the separation of the body and the mind when I was nursing. And then there's a snake that wraps around the neck, and that creates that division of color between something more realistic and something a little more morbid. And snakes are symbolic of shedding of skin and a rebirth and maybe transformation and even healing. The pink machine is an old unsophisticated radio that I got from an antiques book, but it's just kind of an outmoded form of communication, and this was supposed to be symbolic of my inability to communicate my feelings. And then there's the balls of yarn. They all symbolize, each ball of yarn symbolizes another woman's story. That was the conclusion I came to later, that I think all of these women who were struggling, that made me feel less alone if I could talk to somebody about it, and I eventually was able to do that. And anyway, it's just also about the burden of the domestic chores in the home. Yarn leads to knitting, to making clothes, to caretaking again. And then these creatures in the background are trilobites, which are one of the earliest known groups of arthropods, existing 500 million years ago. And I think that was a symbol of self-preservation. And then she reaches her arm out the window, symbolizing the desire for some freedom and autonomy, and to reach outside of the role of always being a mother. And this was the piece that I submitted to the Bennett Prize, which I was one of the 10 finalists, and then I ended up winning that grant in 2019. And that was a grant created to support women painters, one of the largest awards offered to women artists. And I was the inaugural recipient, which was pretty exciting. It was a huge honor to receive this. And then I was given 2 years to create a solo show. And this is Stephen Bennett and Elaine Schmidt, the night that was receiving the award. They're the benefactors of this prestigious award. So this is the first piece I made for the solo show. Many of the pieces in this show here at Dunedin Fine Arts Center in Metamorphosis are from my solo show, but then there's additional pieces that were some before and some I made after. But this was the first piece I made for my solo show for the Bennett Prize, and you can see it in the gallery here. Live and Let Live was a sentiment I had been thinking about a lot with the Me Too movement and issues surrounding abortion rights, and I felt compelled to make a piece in response. And this is, in a way, it's also an homage to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, and I feel very strongly that women should be able to decide what to do with their own bodies, and it's been devastation that we have overturned Roe v. Wade. Bodies should be respected and protected. They are sacred spaces and should be put on a pedestal and held with reverence. Shortly after I won the Bennett Prize, a few months later, I went through a very ugly divorce. And then a few months after that, we had COVID. That was a fun year. So, once I went through my divorce, I made this piece called Devil's Bread, which is about the death of a relationship. Devil's Bread is a flower, and it's very beautiful, it's delicate, and it's also deadly. And that is what's coming out of the mouth of this man's head. This is a self-portrait. Again, I use myself as a model. And I put a sort of like ornate Rococo wig on my head that represented to me the need to look beautiful on the outside, but inside I was in a lot of pain. And then there's a little tiny praying mantis. You probably can't tell from that image, but if you go in the gallery and take a closer look, but a praying mantis, it's very small but very significant. The female bites the head off of the male after mating. I'll just let you figure out what that means. And then there's a decapitated head, if you didn't know it is. This piece was inspired by, in some ways, Artemisia Gentileschi's version of Judith and Holofernes, which is a story about a woman overpowering a man and cutting off his head in order to protect her people. Then there are organs that are tied to the tree and sort of represent the aftermath of something violent. And then the next piece I made, called Virulent, the word virulent, if I can say it right, it means poisonous or venomous or hostile. And this piece was about my experience with COVID, wearing the mask and the isolation of the interior space, feeling like you're being trapped in a box, and the idea that there's danger at every turn. I have some Venus flytraps surrounding the figure. Again, this is another self-portrait. There's a scorpion at her feet. She even has what look like snakes or worms on her, crawling on her legs. And then below the scorpion, there is a clock or a pocket watch that has no numbers on it, and it's sort of the not knowing when the end of the pandemic was going to happen. And then I made this piece called Fecundity, and this piece, fecundity means fertility and abundance, and this was about experiencing my autonomy and my independence after divorce and finding my own sensuality again. And so she has, and this one is not a self-portrait, but I was still living vicariously through this character. But she has lots of fruit piled up at her feet, representing decadence, butterflies that are coming out of the fabric that are symbolic of liberation and freedom. Her skin is glowing red to show her sort of ardent passion for life. And she wears the crown of phalluses. You can take a closer look when you get in the gallery and see that. You probably can't tell from this picture. But it sort of represents her power over men. And this was an awakening for me. I felt kind of like a queen, a ruler of my own world, and I was feeling a lot of joy and allowing beauty into my life again. And this is a piece about my children. It's called Symbiosis, and symbiosis means a close, prolonged connection. And this was about my children and their connection to each other and also their resilience during going through a divorce and COVID, which I could not protect them from. They had to live through it. But they were so good to each other, and I was so really emotional. I'm sorry. I was just so moved by the love they have for each other that gave me so much peace when I knew I couldn't save them from some of these things that are really difficult. So the string, I have string that attaches them. This is a diptych. It's two separate pieces, but they're kind of existing in the same room. And then their toes are tied to each other with the string. Excuse me. The space is kind of like a playroom. And it seems like it would be a safe space, but it also is this sort of sickly green color that's a little bit ominous. And so I wanted to represent them as surviving through this kind of, uncomfortable kind of episode in their life, but show them as regal and stoic. And so my daughter is wearing a little gold crown, and she has a sugar glider next to her. That's like her little spirit animal. And my son is wearing a ruffled collar and has their lion cub as their spirit animal next to him. Okay. I've also made a lot of smaller pieces. I do work smaller sometimes, and these are the 22 by 30 inch size portraits. And I made some of those. These are in the show at the Art Center here, and I made some before and I made some after the Bennett Prize pieces that are also in the show. But I'm able to work out ideas more quickly with these smaller pieces, investigating women's roles through symbolism and making these like little kind of mini allegories, but they're still telling stories. I'm not going to go into details with these. So even when I reveal personal stories, I always tell viewers that all of my work is open for interpretation. The symbols can have multiple meanings for multiple people. They are transient, they are changing, they evolve for me. When I come visit the piece again, I see new things. And I learn something new each time. So I do want my viewers to feel free to have their own thoughts and feelings about the work. In every piece, in a way, is a self-portrait, even if I'm not a model. And I'm revealing my understanding of my female experience. But I also invite you to find your own way of seeing it with your own visual history. And so it does not have to have static meaning. I'm just going through this a little more quickly. This is the most recent piece that I made. I just finished it a few weeks before I put the show up here. And this piece is called Viable. Viable means capable of working and functioning and developing adequately. And I am striving to do this. After everything that I've been through, I have a lot of pride in my accomplishments, and I have learned how to have a lot of self-love, which I didn't know how to do before. And I've been able to acknowledge a lot of the pain of my past, but move forward. So this is another self-portrait. I did use myself as a model for this piece. And I took pictures in my studio. Sorry. I couldn't hear myself for a minute there. I was distracted. I took these pictures in my studio to work from, and I posed in a way that looks both stoic but also protective of myself, with an arm across my chest, kind of covering my heart. And being unclothed is also another way of being vulnerable as well. But there is still determination in the posture and in the gaze and the looking back. And the landscape is really colorful, it's really beautiful, it's waiting to be explored. To me, it's about my future. And then there's a small figure, a silhouette, a little red figure in the background, and I feel that that is me of the past, watching from a distance me in the future. Don't get too wooey. And then there are bloody hands coming out of the ground that represent some of the painful hardships that I've experienced. So Metamorphosis, the show that you'll see in the gallery, is the word metamorphosis means the process of transforming and developing into something different. And I believe that has happened for me in many ways. I'm becoming the person that I was meant to be, and in this show at this art center is an overview of all of that, what I just explained to you. And I'm very proud of the show, and I'm very grateful that y'all came out today to listen to me talk about the work in more detail. And in closing, I just wanted to give you a few of my, there's some resources here. My website is anekaingold.com. My Instagram is at Aneka Ingold, and I have work that is available on original work at artsy.net, but I also have reproductions of my work that are on my website that are available as well. And my gallery up north is rjdgallery.com. If you want to see more of my work on that website, you can. But it's been an absolute privilege to talk with you all today. And thank you so much for coming. And I can answer questions now if anybody wants to. Does anybody have a question? Yes, go ahead.
Talk a little bit about the process of pens. What kind of painting pens you use and why?
Can you say it one more time?
Talk about your process with the pens that you use. It's for the graphic background, right? That's what you're using for?
Are you asking about pins? Did you say?
You said you use pens.
Oh, pens. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you said pins. I misunderstood. Yeah, I do use paint pens. I just use like a Sharpie brand. I just use the water-based ones, and that is for things like, if you look at in the centerpiece here in the background, you see these almost look like crystal shards coming out around her. Those are all done with paint pens. So I can get a really nice clean line with a paint pen. I use a ruler, or sometimes I just do organic shapes too. Like you can see in the piece on the left, there's a little pattern behind the girl. The little red skulls on a blue background, and those are all done with paint pen too. So I just get a really nice even line rather than using like a tiny brush. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
I loved the portraits that you did of your children in the gallery. Now
Thank
the
you.
lines, that's what I fell in love with the first time I saw the lines that are on the faces. Is that all Prismacolor or what is that?
Yeah, let's go back. The texture on of it
It looks like it's all drawn lines on top of it.
Yes,
Is that
it's that
Prismacolor?
Prismacolor pencil,
Okay.
and I do a lot of mark making to build up the value, and so a lot of the time it does have kind of almost a texture to it. Does that
Yeah,
make
that's,
sense?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
How long does it take you to do each? I'm sure it's different, but about.
Yeah, it really depends on what else is going on in my life, how much I can get in the studio, but like big pieces take me, I mean, that last one I just, this one that I just finished, I think it took me about 2 months, but I did it over the summer, and I wasn't teaching, and I had a lot of time to work on it. But if I'm working on something during the school year, or I have my kids a lot, then it might take me more, like 6 months or something, you know? Yeah. Yes.
Do you have ideas that are percolating and then, but it takes some time and maybe things cross over and you do something else but come back?
Yes. I do. I get ideas, something might pop into my head, and I think I want to see what happens with this. But then I have some say, like with this one, I knew I wanted to do another self-portrait. I just didn't know what it was going to be about. And so when I started doing the photo shoot with myself, that's when it started to come together. But sometimes I will put something in that doesn't feel right, and I have to paint it out, and then I'll put something else there. It's a little bit of trial and error. But again, I had a whole stack of images that were like, I collected and I put them on the wall, and then I, was using them in this piece. And I took pictures of my own hands with red paint on them to look like blood. It's like I started getting these ideas, so I'm taking my own pictures, but I'm also finding photos, and so it's kind of back and forth. Yeah.
So do you keep a notebook that 2 o'clock in the morning an idea wakes you up, that you write it down?
I probably should, but I actually do sometimes resolve things for my paintings in like a dream. And that's why I love the surrealist work too, because of that idea of finding art through our dreams and using dream-like logic. But no, I don't write things down. I don't really use words. It's all just, visual in my head. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, do you ever work on 2 separate pieces at once? Go back and forth?
Not really. I sometimes when I have a deadline and I want to do a couple smaller pieces for a show, I'll try and do 2 at a time, but I really just get engaged with one. It's almost like schizophrenic to have like 2 pieces at the same time, so it's usually just one. Yeah. Yes.
Amazing work, by the way.
Thank you, Dennis.
In your original gallery talk,
Yes.
you spoke about your technique of putting the paper on aluminum.
Oh yeah.
Could you go into that more?
Sure, yes. Okay, so for my Enterprise solo show, that was called Transfiguration, it was up north in Michigan, so I just rolled up all of the drawings and I shipped them in a box or 2, whatever, to the Muskegon Museum of Art where the exhibition was going to be. And they did all of the mounting and framing for me. And what they did is they took it to a place that dry mounted the drawings to what's called dye bond, which is like a fiberglass panel that they like make signs out of, I guess. But that's what they cut it to the size of my drawing, and then they put it through a dry mount press or something. I wasn't there for it, but it looks really good. And then they had them framed for me. Yeah. So I actually haven't done it myself, but it does make a nice looking final product. Yeah.
One more thing, we just spoke about in your original speech at the gallery. was when you did the two portraits of your kids, you had to redo, am I right, of your daughter?
I did. Okay, you're right. This is what happened. I think I keep trying to block that out, but yes, this is
Sorry.
no, it's okay. Well, what happened is I wanted to try mounting them myself before I shipped them. And we had been, the gallery and the museum and I had been kind of going back and forth about how we were going to finish, you know, the presentation for the pieces. And so I got a piece of this die bond and I thought I'll try to mount it with, I used like some kind of liquid, like paste. And I had never done it before, so I don't know why I thought that I should just put the painting on there without testing it first. But I ruined the painting, the one of my daughter, this one, this one. It just warped and bubbled and it just, and I kept trying to get the bubbles out and it just started tearing and it was off. And I was on a deadline. At this point, I had done all the work and it was supposed to be shipped to the museum. And so I redid the whole painting in 1 week. And I just worked like nonstop on it. And I had enough of the painting that survived that I could make a template of where everything was. And then I could just black it out. And I had all the colors still saved. And so I just replicated it, like exactly. And so sometimes you have to make a painting in a week and you just make it work. I'm sorry if that was too long-winded, but well, I think we should maybe, is there any more questions? We can wrap it up here and I can talk to people more in the gallery. I don't even know what time it is. Did I go over?
Thank you so much. It is an absolute honor, truly, to have your work these ones and to hear you speak so beautifully about the making and your process, your thoughts, your history. Really, really beautiful and awe. We're absolutely honored, privileged. Thank you. So now let's open the gallery. I just got the cookies and the mimosas